using real arcade controls with Retropie to play classic arcade games in MAME. I've been collecting a lot of arcade controls for probably 20 years now, since I first discovered MAME, Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator, with the intent of one day building a cabinet, but that day still hasn't come. But in the meantime, I thought I would dig out all of this stuff and just at least set up some sort of a prototype station so that I can try things out using the Raspberry Pi, which is in this NES case right now, and I have it going to HDMI on a television. So using USB inputs, I can get this stuff hooked up. I have all kinds of arcade push buttons, including dedicated player 1, 2, 3, and 4 icons, because I wanted a cabinet that has authentic layout. I don't just want buttons all over the place and you have to remember, oh, this is for the player 1 or 2 start. I want it to make sense. Everything is pretty much micro switch based, so you have a common and a normally open and a normally closed, and you usually just use the common with normally open. When you push down on the button, the plastic pushes on the micro switch actuator. And joysticks are pretty much the same thing, micro switches, so you push up, down, left, right, and the micro switches get activated. This one happens to be a rotary joystick. The joystick itself, in addition to moving normal, you can rotate the shaft, and it clicks this 12 position switch. And it has a 13-pin connector, 12 discrete switches plus ground, or common. So therefore, wherever this is rotated, whatever position it's in, you can still go up, down, left, right, change that position, and the circuit board for the arcade game is going to know exactly which way you are rotated. So a lot of SNK games like Guerrilla War, Ikari Warriors, Time Soldier, things like that, you could change what direction you're aiming while you're running around. So that was a clone joystick aftermarket, but this is the real SNK one. I used to see this in the arcade all the time. So you rotate. You've got your 13-pin harness with a rotary switch on the bottom, and then buried in here is the micro switches for the up, down, left, right. I bought these. LS30 is the model number. I bought 2 of these, and I think I even bought another one I'm using as a spare for parts, probably in the early 2000s on eBay. I can't remember if I spent maybe $50 for the pair of them, and they are just pulled out of arcade games, but totally worth it. And in addition to switches and joysticks with micro switches, there's also mouse interfaces. So here's a trackball, and it has an optical encoder disc for each X and Y. I can't really get in there to show, but it's basically one of those channels that the encoder disc is going to rotate in between, and it breaks or allows the beam of light to be detected by a phototransistor or something like that. So it's like a mouse. I also have this. I don't know if there was an official name or if people in the MAME retro gaming industry just chose to call this a spinner. So it's like a mouse with one axis only, just the X, I guess. This one was designed by somebody on one of the community forums way back. So it's got this encoder disc, and it goes through the optical sensor right here. So you would hook this up to an X or Y axis of a mouse interface, and you can play things like Arkanoid or discs of Tron. This one was actually designed for. So aside from spinning, you can push it down or pull it up. It has these leaf switches, so you can push down and this will make contact, or you can pull up on this and the bottom leaf switches will make contact, and you can rotate it. So of course I wanted this to be able to play Arkanoid and Tron. And speaking of Tron, also on eBay I bought this Xenophobe trigger joystick. So up, down, left, right. It's got the 2 thumb switches and a trigger, so this can be used for Tron, light cycles and things. And instead of micro switches, this one has those leaf switches. So as you push the joystick in a certain direction, these will make contact. I can't remember, I might have spent $20 on this, but again, almost 20 years ago. It's all ready to mount in a custom arcade cabinet someday. And what's an arcade cabinet without official coin doors? Of course, most games only had 2 coin slots, and some only had even 1, but I wanted to have 4 Just like I wanted to have unique player start buttons for players 1 through 4, because certain games like Xenophobe, which has 3 players, and Gauntlet having 4 players, you do need to put the quarter in the exact coin slot for that player to give it more health or to start that player. So I did want 4 inputs. When you drop a quarter in, it'll momentarily trigger a micro switch on the way down. So I hooked up a red LED temporarily. Let's just see what happens. And it came on very momentarily. So it comes with 2 sets of keys. I chose to get the door with the extra bottom door instead of a lot of them just have this panel and that's it. So to get the quarters out, you would have to open this door, and then you could reach in and get the money out. But on mine, you've got this separate access door down here to get at the money. Although it'll just be in my basement whenever I build the unit, I do want to use it as a coin bank. So I save my money and I get to play games at the same time. On the back end, there's these 4 incandescent lights here to light up the 25-cent thing. You push to reject, and if a coin is stuck in here inside this coin mechanism, it'll do whatever it's got to do. So the micro switches are mounted right here on each one, and you wire this up to detect when a coin has successfully fallen in, and it just drops on out at the bottom if it's successful and falls into the coin collection bin. And a lot of people that do make arcade cabinets, even though they use authentic hardware, they might set up an extra micro switch on the inside here so that when you push to reject, it'll do something to push a micro switch to trigger as if they inserted a coin. But I want it to be all authentic. I want to have to put money in and get it back out later. Now I'm running Retropie. As a test, I had some scrap wood and I mounted joysticks and buttons just to get going. I didn't mount the 1-player start button, but it's there, so I can use it. I have the coin door set up with one of the coin mechanisms as well as some of these joysticks and buttons wired up to this IPAC board, which is basically a keyboard emulator. This is a really old IPAC 4, so it has enough inputs for 4 players, and this one uses a PS2 keyboard connector. So I have a cable going from PS2 over to USB on the Raspberry Pi. So the way the keyboard emulator works, whatever buttons, joysticks, and coin door buttons I want to use, one of the 2 micro switch buttons go to a common ground, and the other switch contact would be routed to a screw terminal for a keyboard input. So depending which input a switch is wired to, when you press that switch and bring it to ground, this IPAC will send out a dedicated keystroke over the PS2 keyboard port, which registers on the Raspberry Pi as a certain USB keyboard keystroke. So when I insert a coin into that rightmost slot, it will ground the appropriate input, and this will send out a keyboard number 5. When I press player 1 start, that input sends out a keystroke number 1, and so on for the joystick and other buttons. So all the games in MAME are set up to recognize a given keyboard key when the arcade control is used. So the joystick is up, down, left, and right, so I can use it to control the menu as well. So let's launch a game, insert a coin, press the player start button, and see how it goes. Well, that's no good. Oh, come on. I give up. That's not good. At least it's all running. One of these days I'll get around to putting all this in an arcade cabinet. At least for now, it's good to know I have most, if not all, the parts available for when I want to go ahead and complete the project.